Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another virtual science camp. Today, we've got a very special guest host, Jeff Wiener, who's joining us from CERN. He's the head of teacher programs there. We're just going to wait another second as people are still being admitted. It takes a long time for people to connect at the same time. If you're new to this, I'd suggest you put us in speaker view with the view thing up in the top right. You can switch between gallery and speaker view. So put Jeff and I in speaker view. Welcome again. Just to briefly introduce Jeff, like I said, he's the manager of teacher programs at CERN. I met him in 2018 when he welcomed me there. And in some ways, I considered it kind of like getting a golden ticket, like if you know Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Getting invited to CERN was like getting invited to the science teacher's version of a chocolate factory. And then getting to meet Jeff, that was like a version of Willy Wonka. Not quite as weird and zany, but like still same energy levels, and being felt like I was shown around behind the scenes, getting to see like everything that just made me giddy learning. So I'm really thrilled to see him again. It was a great catching up with him for a couple minutes before letting you guys into the session. He's the kind of guy who you just end up being happy being around. He's welcomed over 4,000 teachers to CERN from a number of different countries. I don't think I asked you how many countries you've been welcomed teachers from, but he
more than 60 for sure.
Okay, more than 60. So like with the virtual science camps, I think we have people from 9 different countries here tonight. Over the course of all the camps, we've been up to 17 countries, but like Jeff with his teacher programs at CERN, that puts all of that to shame. So without further ado, I'm very happy to turn things over to Jeff, who's going to introduce you guys to CERN. Thank you again for joining us, Jeff.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me and for this very, very flattering introduction. I think I've never been introduced as the Willy Wonka of science, but I will definitely put that now on Facebook and Twitter and everything. That's the best title I've ever got. Yeah, and my website. Awesome. Yeah, welcome everyone. I'm really excited to see so many people joining for this session, because I do know that it's 6 o'clock in the afternoon, at least here in Europe. And I know most of you probably spend a lot of time these days in front of your screen, unless you have live lessons still. So I'm very happy that you're here. And I hope that whatever I'm going to present to you will be interesting to you. I will quickly share my screen, because I do have a presentation prepared for this session. And the idea from my side is, so I have this presentation where I will introduce you to CERN. I will talk a little bit about our Higgs discovery, because it is the most famous one. Ooh, and if those maybe who are not speaking could mute their microphone, I think that would be super helpful. And then I also want to present a little bit about what's next. So what is the future of particle physics? But no worries, I will keep it as short and easy to understand as possible. And the most important thing for me is that it makes sense to you. So if there are any questions, so if there's anything you don't understand, feel free to probably best use the chat of Zoom and just post your questions there, just write them down. And Michael, he will scan the chat while I'm talking, and he will stop me if it makes sense for me to explain something in more detail, so we can do that. And for sure, I will not talk for too long, so I will at some point stop, and we can then take any questions that you might have. All right.
And with a number of questions, just to give you guys some warning, I'm going to wait until it makes sense to interrupt Jeff, and I might group them together. If you don't think your question has been answered, ask it again, or ask it again at the end, because if it's something where I think it's been answered already, I might not interrupt to ask it. So just keep that in mind as we go through the session.
Exactly. Awesome. All right, then I will just quickly start by telling you, first of all, well, we've mentioned CERN. So what is CERN actually? CERN is an international organization. We are located here in Geneva, in Switzerland. And CERN, the name is an acronym, and it stands for Conseil Européen pour la Recherche Nucléaire. This is unfortunately the only time I will speak French during this presentation. I say unfortunately for all our French guests. For all the others, I think that's good news. Especially you don't want to hear me speak French, but it can be translated in the English language. We would say it's the European Council of Nuclear Research, or nowadays we call it the European Laboratory for Particle Physics. So the name itself is quite old. And in the very beginning, we really called it nuclear research, what we were doing, because that was what we were doing some 65 years ago. But by now, we are way broader and we call it particle physics. And on this slide that you can now see, I really briefly summarized the 4 main missions of this organization. And I will tell you more about each of those missions, of course, but just to showcase what we are doing. And also maybe for some of you who want to memorize it afterwards, if you want to tell someone about CERN, you can memorize what CERN is about by just using the 4 letters of our acronyms of CERN, and you can reuse it for one of the main missions you see on my slides. The first one is international collaboration. So the C could be also used for international collaboration, because this organization is a combination of several different countries. I will show you in a second which one these are. And because no country alone could do or could run such a huge research lab. I mean, it is the largest research lab in the world. And so it only works if a lot of countries come together and provide funding, so they have to pay, but also provide scientists to do the work. So that's the idea of the international collaboration. The second point, the E, could stand for education. So education is absolutely important, and it's one of the main reasons why I'm super happy that there are so many people in this conference today, because what we are all about at CERN is training the next generation of scientists. So if you want to run such a huge organization doing research over many, many years, you need to make sure that young students get interested and motivated to join us at some point, so we can hand over the work to you. So education is a very important part at CERN as well, because that's our future. And I will come back to that, of course, during my presentation. Now, the third main mission of CERN, obviously the R, is fundamental research. I mean, this is what we are doing. We conduct research in particle physics. Usually, you might have heard that this means that we take particles and we accelerate them to really, really high energies and then smash them against each other. That's usually what we do. We do other things as well, but that's mainly what we do. And I will also mention that during this presentation. And last but not least, the part of new technologies, that is actually super interesting, because we at CERN, we do fundamental research or basic research. So we do something that no one else has done before. So we constantly invent new tools, new research instruments. And from time to time, it can happen that some of those new technologies are not only helpful for our research, but they also end up in our daily lives. I mean, I will give you the first and most important example right at the beginning. The fact that we can have this meeting today, where we all see each other via this Zoom conference from completely different areas of the world, is only possible because we have the World Wide Web, the internet as we call it. And guess what? The World Wide Web was invented at CERN. It was not the World Wide Web back then. It was only, in big quotation marks, the web. So it was an idea of a British scientist. His name was Sir Tim Berners-Lee. He's still alive. And he invented the web, how to share data, you know, between research institutes, for example. And this was a fantastic idea, which helped us at CERN. But then a lot of people saw, oh yeah, this is helpful and interesting for our daily lives. And now we have the internet through which we can now have this session. So just to show you what this fourth important mission of CERN is, this new technology, but I will also come back to that. All right, so this was essentially the entree. This is what I'm promising you now to talk about. And maybe a little bit of history, just a little bit, to tell you where we started and where we are coming from. So everything at CERN started already in the year 1949. So a couple of years after the Second World War ended, Europe was in a very bad shape. So this was after the big war. So there was a lot of countries or areas were destroyed. A lot of people had to flee and emigrate to other countries. So in terms of research, there was not a lot of things going on. And that's when a lot of important scientists and Nobel Prize winners suggested, hey, why don't we set up a research laboratory in Europe to bring together researchers who worked in their home countries before the wars, to bring them back closer to their homes, but also to share the workload. Because as I said, this is a huge laboratory nowadays, and it only works if you work together. And so this was the beginning of how it worked together. And what I find fascinating is back then, there were some countries, and they were still, after the war, they were not necessarily talking to each other. This was still a couple of years after the war ended. So on a diplomatic level, they did not talk to each other. But on a scientific level, the scientists, they already could, put aside all the differences and just say, well, yeah, okay, the war was terrible, but we have a shared interest in finding out what the universe is all about. So let's collaborate. And so from there, we have this beautiful slogan called Science for Peace, which is our unofficial slogan. And from the very beginning, this is exactly what we are all about. So CERN is not just a research project, but it's also a peace project. And that's one of the main reasons why I'm so happy to work here, because it really brings together so many people from around the world. And we only have one thing in mind, and that's science, which sounds a little bit nerdy. And it is. CERN, there are a lot of nerds, but I mean nerd in the best way possible. I love nerds. I'm a nerd myself, so go nerds. All right. So to make sure that this is really a peace project, of course, we had the UNESCO guarantee that this creation of this research laboratory makes sense. And so you see on my slide, in 1952, CERN was officially founded under the auspices of UNESCO. So UNESCO, this big UN, United Nations organization, guaranteed that this is a useful project. And then in 53, the so-called CERN Charter was signed. And you see the charter on the right-hand side on my slides, where on the slides, you might not be able to read who signed, and especially for which countries. I will just tell you. So there were the first 12 member states. The first one is Germany, then Belgium, then Denmark, then France, then Greece and Italy. And then on the other side, we have Norway, the Netherlands, Great Britain, Sweden, Switzerland, and back then the Republic of Yugoslavia. So these are the first 12 member states who founded CERN. And they all signed this, the CERN Charter. It's like the birth certificate. So this is, the official first document to create this organization. And it wasn't politicians who signed on behalf of this of their countries. These were scientists. So, for example, Werner Heisenberg. I don't know if some of you might know Heisenberg from the Heisenberg principle. It's a very famous physicist. He signed on behalf of Germany, for example. But that also meant that those signatures, they were not legally binding, and so it took another year, so until 1954, until all those signatures were officialized, and that is the beginning of CERN. That's when it really officially entered into existence, and that also means 2 years ago, in 2019, we celebrated our 65th anniversary. So we've been going quite strong for quite some time already, but let's not focus too much on the history. I want to focus more on what is it currently looking at and what is the future. And so currently, from the initial 12 member states, we now really grew a lot. And you can see that there are now 23 member states, which are listed on my slide. And in addition, we also have 8 associate member states. The difference in name, I know it usually causes a lot of confusion. I can just assure you, don't focus too much on the names, because the only reason is at the very beginning, we are still called the European Organization, or the European Council of Particle Physics. But we are no longer European. You know, at the very beginning, it made sense to make sure that this is European, but the longer the organization continued, the more we saw it makes no sense to restrict it only to Europe. We want to be as global as possible. And that's where we then introduced different categories for how states can join the organization. But because of, you know, legal specifications, we are not allowed to call them member states from the very beginning. So, for example, Pakistan or India, who, I mean, as we all know, are not located in Europe, they can join, or they joined us as associate members. And at some point after 5 years, they can either remain an associate member state or even become a full member, but there's no difference in what they can do. Wow, someone is drawing on my slides. Is anyone else seeing that? That's fantastic. I have someone to highlight my slides, so I hope it makes sense. All right. Now, on the right-hand side, CERN today, it says the annual budget. So I mentioned it earlier that those member states and associate member states, they come together to provide the funding. So they pay so that this organization can work. And I put the money there, but please don't misunderstand me. So the annual budget is 1.2 billion Swiss francs, which can be converted into 1.1 billion euros or 1.3 billion US dollars, but we don't get all three of them. So we only get it once. We get 1.2 billion Swiss francs, which of course sounds like a lot of money, or at least to me, it sounds like a lot of money. I don't know who is in this Zoom call. Maybe there is someone who says, oh, billions of francs or euros, that's not a lot of money. If that is the case, maybe you send me a private message. I would be really interested, you know, to get to know you, because if you think that a billion is not a lot of money, we should talk. Okay, I think we can all agree it's a lot of money. But how much money is it if we, you know, look at all the countries together? And if we only look at the member states, for example, who provide the majority of the funding, all the people who live in the member states, this all adds up to about 500 million people. That's round about the number. So if you divide 1.2 billion Swiss francs by 500 million people, it turns out that each inhabitant, every inhabitant of each country pays about, you know, 2 euros or 2 francs per year, which is not a lot of money per person, obviously. And we always compare it to 1 cup of coffee. And that's why I have a cup of coffee on the right-hand side of my slides. So 1 cup of coffee is what every European person or everyone inhabitant of the member states pays per year to CERN. And so just to explain where the money is coming from. Now I want to quickly focus a little bit more on this coffee mug. I don't know if you have seen this cup of coffee or this cup. It's quite famous. So, you know, if you Google CERN or so, you might see this cup of coffee, especially you might see the formula. It's a very, very famous formula, and it's not really easy to understand. I don't want to, you know, I don't want to lie to you and say, oh, come on, look at that. That's easy. It's not. I mean, you have to study particle physics to really, you know, fully understand and appreciate the beauty behind it. But in short, what we like to say, this is the short version of the so-called standard model of particle physics. And you might have heard of that already. This is the best scientific model we have at the moment in particle physics, because this describes how everything that we can observe in our universe, how it works on a particle level. And you can really summarize it in this short formula that we have printed on this coffee mug. It's the short version. The real version takes a little bit longer. It's about 2 pages long, and it is not easy to understand at first. And so here I just want to highlight that we wrote a paper that explains this formula for anyone who might be interested in, but I really don't want to lie to you. It's not easy. So we try to, you know, explain in as easy terms as possible what this formula means, but it's still not, you know, it's not a fun exercise to read. But maybe for some of you, there is something interesting in this paper. It's completely available open access, and you can find this paper, by the way, So I have all the links in this presentation, and I will share my presentation with Michael, and he will then share it with you. So you can just click on it and you can download everything for free. So that's completely what we do at CERN. We share everything we do publicly, openly available. So you can check it out. If it's too difficult, and trust me, it is not easy, well, then, you know, just save it and look at it in a couple of years, because maybe by then it's getting easier. And if not, ask your teacher. That's going to be a fun exercise. You know, why not? All right.
I can see there being a lot of unhappy teachers when they get stumped by questions on that.
Well, those unhappy teachers then just have to read the paper and think it through and then explain it to the students. You know, that's what we do.
Well, and they should learn to be happy and embrace questioning,
Exactly.
even when it confuses them, because it's an opportunity to learn.
Exactly. That's what we say these days, right? Everything is a learning opportunity. All right. So, let me just conclude the overview, and then I'm getting a little bit more into the physics, which probably most of you are looking forward to. At the moment at CERN, we have more than 20,000 scientists from around the world who work together under the umbrella of CERN. That doesn't mean that all 20,000 of them are on site all the time, especially not during Corona. That's where we also have to reduce our time on site a lot, unfortunately. But on my slides, I wrote down there are about 2,600 so-called staff scientists. And that just means these are people who are permanently employed at CERN. So I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm one of them. Then there are 800 fellows. These are postdocs, so people who finished their PhD and now do a 2 or 3 year long fellowship. And we have about 550 students. So I myself have a couple of awesome PhD students, and we have some other bachelor students. So we are still talking about university students, of course. So for most of you, this is still information that might be more relevant in the future, but I'm always the one who keeps insisting we have to tell students as early as possible what kind of options are there, and not just for CERN. Don't get me wrong. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of CERN, but whatever I'm going to tell you is completely true for any field in science and in all other fields. Whatever interests you, you should know about it and should see what are the options for the future. So I'm doing that for CERN, but of course there are many, many more other options. All right, and now to complete the slide, you see on my slides that there are 15,000 users, and this is really the majority of people. And they are not on site all the time. These are users who can come to CERN from time to time for a day, a week, a month. Some of them are here, you know, for several years, and they are sent to CERN from their institutes or from their universities to perform experiments at CERN. So this is really, they are using our facilities, and that's the idea of our research laboratory. And that's why why CERN is such an international place, because you have people really from all around the world. So you have the world map here, and you see, don't worry too much about the different colors. So if something is blue or dark gray, this just means it's a different status. But overall, as long as there is any color if any state is colored in any color, it means we have some cooperation agreement with this country. And then the 2,000 externals, by the way, these are sorry, I shouldn't say just, these are technicians and engineers who are from the local area. I would never say just, of course, but they are the ones who help us construct and upgrade and maintain our machines, because in a couple of seconds, I will show you our beautiful machines, and you will see we do need a lot of technicians. So me saying just was really wrong, and I should not do that. It was a slip of my tongue. All right. So what do we do? What is it that we do at CERN? Now, I sold you how awesome CERN is, and I didn't really tell you what it's all about. Well, it's quite simple. We want to answer or investigate 3 fundamental questions. These are really fundamental questions of humankind. Everything else would be boring. So why not start right at the beginning? The question is, where do we come from? And it's not just us as humans, but really the whole universe. What is the beginning of the universe, if there even was one? And here the best explanation is the Big Bang Theory. Not the sitcom, but I enjoyed watching the sitcom a lot, so why not use it? But here in this case, we are really talking about the scientific idea or the theory of the Big Bang Theory that 13.8 billion years ago, something happened. We don't really know what happened. And we call it the Big Bang. And from there, a lot of energy transformed into particles that are now making up the whole universe, us included. That's our best explanation at the moment, where we are coming from. But we still have so many open questions, and it's so difficult to get closer to understanding what happened in the very first moments after the Big Bang, that we really have to do a lot of research there. The second question is, what are we made of? So can we describe everything with elementary particles that are really elementary? And is it really impossible to, find even smaller particles? And this is exactly the idea of the standard model of particle physics, where we explain that everything, like matter, is made of particles, and they interact via so-called interaction particles. So that's what you always try to explain. But here we also have one big problem. The standard model of particle physics in itself is beautiful and it works. It works perfectly fine. We have never found any experiment or any observation that contradicts the standard model of particle physics. Never. And normally you would assume, okay, so scientists are happy. But that's not true. We are so unhappy. It sounds so strange, but we are so unhappy that the standard model of particle physics is so perfect, because it can only explain a small amount of our universe. It cannot really explain everything. And the fact that we don't find anything that doesn't work means it's perfect, it's complete, but it can only explain a little bit. So we would love to see some things where it breaks up and we have to think of new ideas to explain more things. But at the moment, unfortunately, it always works, which is very strange. So of course, on the one hand, we are very happy that it works, but on the other hand, we would love if there's, one minor detail that just doesn't work, because then we would know, yeah, there is something new. So that's why we focus on the second question, to hope to break the standard model, so to speak. And then, of course, last but not least, the third question is, where are we going? And this is, again, not just us as humans, but also the whole universe, because we see since the Big Bang theory, or since the Big Bang, that the universe has been expanding in every direction. And it continues to go out and out and out. And we have no idea if it will continue doing that, or if it will stop at some point, or if it even comes back. We have no idea. So this is the third important question that we try to investigate. And what I can already tell you is that in each one of those 3 chapters, there are so many Nobel Prizes of physics still hidden. So there are so many different ideas or questions that we still have to answer, that a lot of scientists will be able to collect Nobel Prizes by just, investigating one of the 3 chapters. So if you want to pursue a career in science, I promise you, I guarantee you, we leave a lot of Nobel Prizes for you. We don't collect all of them because we cannot answer everything, unfortunately. Okay, so finally, how does it look like? What is CERN? How does this organization look like? How do we work? And so first of all, let me show you this beautiful image of, this is Geneva, or you can see part of Geneva. You can also see the very, very back end of the image, the highest white point down here. This is the Mont Blanc. So this is the highest mountain of continental Europe that we can see from our terrace from CERN. So it's really beautiful. You can also see the Lake Geneva, which is a beautiful lake, especially during summer. You can swim in it. It's beautiful. But of course, what you see at the very first moment when you look at this picture, you see this very, very big yellow circle, which is called the LHC, which some of you might have heard already, and it stands for the Large Hadron Collider. And what does it mean? This is the largest particle accelerator in the world. Yes, that's one of the main reasons why CERN is also the largest particle physics laboratory in the world, because we have the largest particle accelerator. And with this machine, we can accelerate particles to really, really high energies and then have them collide, so that in those collisions, new particles are created. So we want to create new particles in those collisions that we can then investigate. And you can see on my slides, the LHC it says 27 kilometers. So it has a circumference of 27 kilometers, which is huge, which also means this accelerator is not built on the ground. You know, we have a lot of visitors. When they come to visit us, they fly in with the airplane and then they land and then they come to us. And then one of the first questions is, yeah, so we arrived in Geneva by airplane and we looked out the window, but we did not see this accelerator. Where is it? And then, of course, we have to explain to them, well, we would never build such a large building, you know, 27 kilometers, that's huge, on the ground. That would make no sense. We placed the accelerator underground. So the LHC is really about 100 meters underneath the floor, just to, you know, so we don't have to build a building that is a huge circle. That would make no sense. Okay, now this image is beautiful, but I don't want to, you know, I want to be honest with you. It's not the real CERN. I mean, it's a real image, but it's not really showing you what CERN really looks like on the inside. So let me just go one slide further. Ah, yes, because this is how CERN looks like. It looks a little bit more technical, but that is really what CERN is all about. You can still see the LHC, so you can see the largest accelerator that we have all the way up here, but it's not our only one. We have a lot of different accelerators that are all connected to each other in a so-called accelerator chain. So they can accelerate particles from, you know, low energy to medium energy to even higher energy, and then to the highest energies possible in the LHC. It's comparable to a car where you have the gear shift and you start with the first gear, then the second one and the third one, so that you gain speed with your car. It's a similar idea with our particles. And the cool thing about this accelerator chain, I could talk for hours. I could totally bore you to death the whole evening and tell you every single detail about every accelerator. I love them, but I'm not going to do that. I promise you. I can answer any question you want afterwards. I'm more than happy to do so, but I'm not going to ruin your Tuesday evening or afternoon by talking too much about accelerators. What I do want to tell you is what happens if we collide particles, because I told you we accelerate particles so that we can then have collisions. And that is what I want to focus on. In between, I just want to highlight, if you want to read, and if you want to read on your own how this accelerator chain works, we also wrote a paper here. You can see it here. It's also linked in my slides that will be shared with you. So this is a quite easy paper. It's easier than the first paper that I have on my slides. And this one really explains in a couple of pages how the acceleration works from the very beginning to the very end. And this can be interesting to you. So if you want, feel free to check it out. But, you know, this is just me giving you ideas to read if you want to. It's not mandatory. There will be no quiz, so no worries. All right, but now let's talk about what happens in collisions, because this is really what we want to study. So maybe some of you have seen this image before. It's a very famous image, or at least it was very famous at some point. This is the so-called Atlas detector. It's one of our it's the largest particle detector at CERN. Which is inside or within the LHC. So in the inside of this particle detector, we collide particles. And guess what? A particle detector has one job, and its job is to detect particles. Yes, sometimes it's that easy. The name really says it all. A particle detector detects particles. And of course, this is not an easy task. It's certainly not something that humans can do, but we build these machines so they can then detect the particles for us. When I tell you that this is the largest one, this is absolutely true. And you can see from the image, we placed a French technician on the inside of the detector. And this French technician, he was just there, you know, holding this metal piece. And the photographer said, "Hello, cheese." And he was like, "Oh, what?" And now we have him here. And this really helps us to see how large everything is. So this detector is 46 meters long, 26 meters high. It's huge. It's huge. And what we see here is not finished even. It's really just doing while it was built. Because then hopefully this French technician moved out of the way. I'm pretty sure he did, because then we moved the inner parts of this detector inside. So you see this very cylindrically shaped piece that goes inside, because every particle detector consists of different layers. So you have one layer on the inside, then one more outside, one more outside, one more outside, because that's how we detect particles. In the inside, particles collide, and then the different particles that are created go from the center to the outside, and depending on through which layer they can go through, the detector knows, here was an electron, or if it made it through, oh wow, there was a proton, or if it went even further, there is a muon. So that's what we do, but I do understand that on a Zoom call, me doing this with my hands is not really helping. So I have an image here. There we go. That maybe hopefully makes it a little bit clearer what happens. So here we have the center of collision, and so two protons hit each other in the center, and then their energy transformed into hundreds of new particles that you can see in this image, and they went through, and some of them made it through the first layer, some of them made it to the second, the third layer, and some of them even made it all the way to the outside. And no worries, no human being is looking at those images and is looking, so where is what? No, all of that is done automatically by our detectors. So they are really giving us the information what kind of particles were created in this collision. So that's what we do. And the good news is that we don't have to do that ourselves. It's really the detectors who help us, because those collisions, they happen about 400 million times per second. So this is now me scaring you with large numbers. It happens 400 million times per second. That's how often we collide particles. That's to me, it's not understandable. This is, or at least I cannot imagine how often that is. But our detectors are able to detect each collision and tell us what was in there. So that also means that data storage or data handling, oh my goodness me, this is a very important part of CERN. Okay, if you at home want to, investigate particle detectors a little bit more up close, then I have good news for you, because one of our students, he looked at this beautiful image of the Atlas detector, and especially of those 8 coils that it consists of. So you see those big coils, and our student thought, hey, I can design that, and he did. So you see here an image of a 3D printed model of our Atlas model, where he even put copper wire in those coils. And so this model can create a magnetic field the exact same way as the Atlas detector does in real life. So I don't know if some of you are interested in looking at that. We have all the files available. You don't even have to 3D print it. You can build that out of cardboard and some straws. You can do it super cheap and super easy, but it always works. It's a functional model. So we have all the information on our website. So if that is something that interests you and you want to try something out, we have that available, and the link is on my slides. So you just have to click on the image, and you can find everything online. Maybe it's something for you, but again, same with my papers. I just put everything on my slides in case someone is interested. Then by all means, feel free to try it out. And in addition, maybe just to highlight, because we not only built those models of our particle detectors, we have a different way of detecting particles, and that's by trapping them. It's really true. We trap them, like I don't know, like a mouse. In a box, we put some cheese in there, the mouse comes in, and then we close the door, and then the mouse looks and says, "Whoa, what's going on?" We do a similar version with particles, but we don't use cheese, because particles don't really care about cheese, but they do care about electric fields. And so here you see an image of a particle trap that we built our own. And of course, this is a very advanced setup. So it's not really something you can do at home on your kitchen table, but maybe it's something you want to show to your teacher, and they can build it together with you. And then you see an image here, an image that we took with our cell phone, where we really trap particles, but not elementary particles. In this case, these are more larger sized particles like some dust or some spores, but it works the same way as we do at CERN. And so this is one way how you can bring CERN to your home or to your classroom and brag with it. So if you're interested, and we have many, many more of those ideas, you can find them all on our website. Just to tell you, in case you're interested. Okay, but now I want to continue and actually at some point come to an end because I mentioned at the very beginning that at CERN, so of course we do research. We are really focusing on understanding the universe better and gaining more insights. But from time to time, we develop technologies that are really helpful for our daily lives. And so I mentioned the World Wide Web, the internet, already at the very beginning of my talk. And so I put it here on my slides again. So you see here Google, the search engine. At some point when we switched on our Large Hadron Collider, the largest accelerator, Google was so kind to put us, or the image of the machine, on their search engine. So that was cute. But you see here the second part, something that some or most of you probably use every day. The touch screen was introduced or invented at CERN, but it was never, meant for us to use our phone and swipe left and right and look at cat pictures and everything. I mean, that is cute, and yes, we can do that now. But back then, in the very beginning, the touchscreen was invented for us to control our accelerators, where we had a lot of knobs to turn and a lot of buttons to push. And then one engineer just said, hey, why don't we, invent something that makes that easier? And so it helped us for our research, but obviously that also changed the way, at least how our phones or how iPads work. So it's something that influenced our daily lives, which was never planned from our side. But of course, we are always happy to make everything available, and then some smart people will take it and hopefully use it in a way that we can, make our lives easier. And then the third point here, this is something where I hope that no one of us will ever have to experience this kind of technology, because we are talking about medical applications, and especially about the treatment of tumor cases, for example, which of course is really, really a sad story. And unfortunately, chances are that some of us will know someone at some point. So it's good that we have those technologies to cure cancer. And it's really true what we do at CERN. The technologies that we use to accelerate particles and to detect particles, they already have been used, and they are still in use in hospitals or in very special treatment centers, where we can treat certain tumor cases way better than with any other method. So we don't have to do surgery, we don't have to do chemotherapy. So it's way better on the body. So we don't hurt the body too much, because the body is already suffering a lot, and we can really treat cancer in a very, very very effective way. And so this is something that is also very, very much looked at, so that more and more people have access to it, because people, humans are getting older and older, which is very good, because our life situation improves on average around the world. So our life expectancy increases, but that also means the older we get, the higher the probability that at some point we develop a tumor, which we need to treat. So again, I hope no one of us will ever be required to use it. But if one of us or one of our relatives has to, well, then we are prepared, because research is still focusing very much on medical applications. Okay, but I don't want to focus too much on this admittedly quite sad topic. I honestly want to focus now on the future, because some of you, most of you will think, okay, that's very interesting, but I'm still in high school, so will there still be some research going on in a couple of years when I go to university and I get my first degree? Can I still have a job there, or will there still be some open questions? And the short answer is clearly yes. I mean, I don't know about the job. I don't know if you get a job with us, but the open questions, I promise you, we will still have a lot of open questions. I mean, this is really, we are not even close to being done. And so at some point with the LHC, we will be done. So the LHC, as the largest accelerator, we will not be able to reach higher energies. This is for sure. We all know that at some point the machine is completely done. And if we want to continue accelerating at even higher energies, well, then we might need to build an even larger one. And so I brought this image here, which might give you a little bit of an idea of what the future could be. But don't get me wrong, nothing is decided yet. This is just something that we are now investigating. So what do you see here? You see here this small circle is the LHC. This is the one that we have at the moment. It's the Large Hadron Collider. It's the accelerator we run at the moment. And at some point, this one will be too small. I mean, 27 kilometers, this is quite large at the moment, but at some point it will be too small. So if we then want to continue accelerating at even higher energies, we will have to build, for example, the Future Circular Collider, which is a very strange name. I mean, it works now. It will be the Future Circular Collider, but if we build that, this will be a very strange name, because once it's there, we should not call it the Future Circular Collider. We will probably have to rename it to the Present Circular Collider. And then when we switch it off, it will be the Past Circular Collider. It's a very strange name. So again, you know, names at CERN, we are not very precise. But it's a 100-kilometer machine. It goes all the way underneath the Lake of Geneva. It goes around the mountains. It's huge. Again, it's something where I really struggle imagining how large that is. But we might really construct this machine. It's still not clear. We are still investigating if it's possible to do so. But what is clear for sure is that if we build that, that is really good news for anyone who wants to, you know, start a career in science. And it's not about physics in itself. At CERN, we have so many different disciplines. This is physics, this is engineering, IT, and it's not just at CERN. There are other research laboratories in the world as well. So if this is really something that interests you, well, then I have good news. As long as we continue doing research, there will be opportunities. And I just want to show how it looks like at the moment inside of the LHC. This is not a joke. Inside of the LHC, we do have our bicycles. So we have a rental station. We go down with our elevator, 100 meters underground. Then we take our access card, and then we get a bike, bing, bing, and then we can ride around. Not for fun, of course. No one says, oh, well, let's take a nice bike trip in the tunnel. We do that so we get to the location where we want to, you know, do some works. And we also have those electro scooters that you can see on this image. If you have to transport heavy equipment, then we have our electro scooters. And that's perfectly fine in the LHC. I mean, 27 kilometers. So from one point to the other, we talk about 3 or 4 kilometers to get from one tunnel to the other. That's okay with your bike. You can do that. But if we build the larger one, the 100-kilometer machine, that will be very exhausting. I mean, you cannot ride your bike for, you know, 50 kilometers and then you're there and then you have to work and you're sweating. That's not going to work. So my example is always maybe, I mean, this is not how it looks like. This is just an image. I think it's even from a movie, but that's how I imagine the new accelerator at some point. You know, it's a very shiny and fancy. And we will need new scientists to help us just to understand how we can transport people if they have to do some works down there. It cannot be a bike. We might need a hyperloop or I don't know what. So the message clearly is that we need the next generation of scientists and engineers. I mean, this is always true, but it's especially true if we go forward with the Future Circular Collider. And that's the main reason why I'm so happy and why I was so honored to be invited to take part in the session today, to talk to you. And I will be looking forward to all your questions. I hope you have some questions, because clearly the future, if there is something that interests you, there will be a future. So I thank you for your interest, of course. And I will now come to an end. And I will say merci bien. This is French for thank you. So another French phrase from my side. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask me now, or I assume we have some in the chat and Michael will moderate things. And if you have my website there, so this is also how you can reach me. You can also find me on Twitter, or same with a lot of CERN scientists. So if you want to see what CERN people are doing, you can find a lot on social media as well. And with all of that, I will now shut up. That was almost exactly 40 minutes. So I think we are still within the time that we agreed. And I will shut up now. And I thank you for your attention.
That was amazing. Thank you, Jeff. And like Jeff said, now we'll get to questions. So there aren't any that seem to have built up in the chat so far, but please either ask your questions in the chat, or if there's something you want to get on your microphone yourself to ask, write in the chat, I have a question, and then I'll call on you so that we don't have everyone turning on their microphone at the same time. But if you want to speak out your question like that, please feel free to do that. Just put it in the chat so I know when to call on you. Okay, there's a question from Serena. Is CERN a kind of beamline? Oh, and Jeff, before you answer, is it worth if we stop sharing your screen so people can see you big to answer the question?
Absolutely. Pause share. Stop share. Oh, wow. There are a lot of comments. I did not see any of them. Okay,
well,
so
a lot of the comments were people trying to go over issues with sound. So I was trying to advise them on the background. And some people were good at advising each other, like, thanks, Rachel, for all your help. But none are questions I need to relay to you.
All right, all right. So is CERN a kind of a beamline? So very good question. I would not say that CERN is a beamline, but CERN has a lot of beamlines. So what we mean by beamline is essentially just a tube where we have vacuum inside. So there is no air, there is no dust. So we suck all of that out, and then we can accelerate particles or just have particles moving through this vacuum, so without them interacting with anything that's inside. And that's what we call a beamline. So for example, every accelerator, if you want, consists of a beamline, but CERN itself is not a beamline. CERN is the organization that has beamlines. I think that's the best explanation that I would give. Yeah.
And then there's a question about other sessions. I don't know if that's about whether Jeff will present any other sessions or whether there are more sessions with other guest hosts. There are other sessions with other guest hosts. I'll explain a little bit about that after the questions for anyone interested in hearing about that. Good idea if I try and get Jeff back for one. That's not yet planned, but maybe I'll talk to him about it because it was amazing having him back.
I would be more than happy to do so.
Oh, that'd be perfect. Let's talk about it on our own afterwards rather than in front of everyone. There's a question, can we come to visit?
Oh my goodness me, I would love that if people could come to visit us again. So before Corona, before the pandemic came, of course, there was a lot of visits going on. And yes, we at CERN, the moment you come to us, we will be more than happy to show you around, because we ourselves, we are so happy and so proud of what we do, obviously, that we want to show it to anyone who comes to us. So yes, there are visits possible. Unfortunately, not at the moment. At the moment, we are still on safe mode, as we call it. So most of us are working from home. And we just have to wait until the pandemic runs out, and I hope everyone gets vaccinated. And then at some point we get it under control, and then we will be more than happy to resume that. At the moment, however, you can apply or take part in so-called virtual visits, which I would say are quite similar to what we are doing today. So it's usually a CERN scientist presenting what CERN is doing and then answering questions. So this is at the moment what we are offering to people from around the world. If you're curious to find out more, you can just go to visits.cern. So we have a top-level domain which confuses people a lot. So it's not, .com or .ch. We are just .cern because we invented the web. So I think it's okay that we get this top-level domain. So you just have to go to visits.cern. It is true. I just saw one comment. There were many comments, but the one is we are in Iran and we can't visit you. It is true for more distant countries or countries where there are some limitations. It is a little bit more difficult. That is absolutely correct. And maybe in the future it's going to be easier. What is for sure possible is that, for example, in the eastern region, there is a project called Sesame. I don't know if any one of you has heard about that already. It's a similar research laboratory as CERN. It's not as large, but it was launched with the help of CERN. And it's also an accelerator project for the Middle East, where Iran is also, I believe, I'm not saying something wrong now, one of the member states. So it brings together different countries in the Middle Eastern region. And so maybe this is something where you can have your first visit and then in a couple of years come to CERN. We would be happy to have you, of course, that's for sure. And maybe just to add to that, and then we can go back to the questions. because there was one a message sent to me, at least on my chat, about how to get around in the FCC, and someone said, well, maybe you can use cars because they go faster than bikes, and this is completely true, absolutely. But the problem is we don't have enough space for cars down there, because obviously if you build a 100-kilometer tunnel, the smaller you make it, the cheaper it is, and the more it makes sense. So you don't want to, build a lot of lanes for cars to go around, and also they would probably need to be electric cars, so you don't have the exhaust. So maybe cars is not the best idea. So we might need a better way that we don't know yet about. Okay, Michael, please.
Oh, yeah, I wanted to say just about Sesame. That's another great example of particle physics being used for peace, because everyone needs to work together in peace for that. Also, the people joining from Iran who can't visit CERN, I wanted to thank them again. It came to my attention, someone said that you guys all needed to use VPNs because Zoom is blocked in your country. So thank you guys for going to the extra effort to be able to join us. Should I continue with relaying the questions to you, Jeff?
Absolutely. And I think we can answer those that have been posted in the chat. And then I think someone has a question. If they want to ask them directly, we can do that. I think we go first through the chat, and then we go to the others. So no worries, I'm not going anywhere. I really want to make sure that we get all the questions covered. I think the next one was, what is the material of the cylinder thing? That's a very good question. I'm not sure if I missed some questions before that. But so the cylinder thing, I assume you're referring to the particle detector that I've shown on my slides. So the cylindric onion. If not, please do correct me. So we use different materials. It's a very good question because I talked about the fact that in those collisions we have different kinds of particles that are created, and each of those layers of this particle detector detects certain particles. And the way how it's doing that is that the different layers are made of different materials. And so different particles interact in a different way. And that's how we know if a particle detects with the first layer, which, for example, is made out of silicone, or it's like a piece of metal where it interacts with the material. And some particles don't interact at all. They just go through. So we know, that was not an electron, for example. Electrons do interact here. And then the next layer, for example, these are layers of lead. So really, really heavy metal where no electron can go through, never ever. So everything that goes all the way there has to be, for example, a proton or a neutron. And so these are different materials. We also have so-called wire chambers. I will just go quickly into detail here. These are different wires, so like a straw that you use to drink your drink. So we have a lot of straws. And inside of the straw, there's a gas. And if a particle goes through, it ionizes the gas. And then at the end of each straw, there's a small detector that detects if there is ionization going on or not. And then it says, hey, there was something, there was something. And then the whole detector knows, there was something, there was something, there was something. And then the detector can pull a line through to say that's where the particle was going through. So that's in very short terms how it works. And yes, there are different kinds of materials, different metals, and other stuff.
And fun fact about wire chamber: Georges Charpak got the Nobel Prize for inventing the wire chamber, and he went on to revolutionize education in primary schools in France. And for those joining from my school in Paris, he was one of the driving forces behind our school-developed science inquiry curriculum. And he actually used to regularly come to the school back when he was still alive. He passed away about 10 years ago in one of my first years at the school. So we actually have a close connection to the wire chambers for those who are joining from my school.
Nice. I've seen there are a lot of brilliant questions. I think I will just continue because they are really good questions. So there's one short one. I think it's more for me. How can you work from home on CERN? And I think I should specify there are so many different people so that for them, the standard day looks completely different. So it's absolutely correct. There are some people who have to be on site, obviously. So at the moment, there are some, not a lot, but some technicians, for example, who really have to be on site. You cannot work on an accelerator from home. That's a very good question. It doesn't work like this. But most of us can work from home. So anyone who is doing a PhD in data analysis, for example, all they need are three things. It's really three things. They need a computer, they need coffee, and they need access to the internet. These are the only three things. Coffee is very important, you know, for scientists, or tea, and the internet. So you can work from home to do data analysis. You can work from home to have meetings. We have a lot of Zoom meetings these days, as most people have. But it's absolutely true. Some technicians and engineers have to be on site, and we try to limit their time on site as much as possible so that there's no risk in terms of corona. But yeah, that's what we do. So that was a very good question. And then there's another one next. Will the future circular collider be harmful for the city of Geneva? I mean, like nuclear reactors, are they causing radiation? That's a very good question. It's something that we get asked a lot, and I did not cover it in my presentation. So I'm very happy about this question. So the short answer is no. And we have to be very careful there to address the risks, because obviously it's a large machine and there are risks. But for example, the LHC at the moment is about 100 meters underground. So there is no radiation. Our particle detectors, they don't create any radiation in terms of, you know, radioactive material. There is no such thing. This is the opposite when we talk about nuclear reactors. They produce nuclear waste, which is dangerous. But a nuclear reactor itself also does not radiate any harmful radiation when it's properly working, of course. But if there's an earthquake, that's a different story. But our particle accelerators, they don't create any radiation. The only risk that we have is there is high voltage involved. So you could get, you know, electrified if you are close by. But the good news are nobody is able to go close to the accelerator when it's running. That's completely off the limits. It's not possible. And it's below the ground. So even if something happens, so if there's a shortage or something, well, then there's still 100 meters of stone on top of it. So for the city of Geneva, there were no risks. One issue, of course, so the question is very good because it's a huge machine. And so drilling underneath the city of Geneva is not a problem. Nothing will shake, but we will have to go very, very deep. We have to go deeper than about 300 meters at some point, just to make sure that we don't get in close contact. For example, the heating system of homes, they use the energy from the ground, and they drill quite deep holes for that. And so we have to go way below that. But in terms of risk, there is no risk attached to that. That we can say with absolute certainty. Okay, I hope I answered this question. If not, immediately complain and say, that's not what I paid money for. I want to have better answers. Then I hope you did not pay money. But I will be more than happy to answer anything. Next one. Yeah, exactly. There was another very good question. So what is the exact aim behind all of these works? Yeah. What are some most important goals that CERN looks up to achieve? Can you talk on these a little bit? Oh my goodness me, that's a very good question. And indeed, that was one question that I hoped to trigger. I didn't want to put it into my talk. So we can briefly summarize it in this way, that if we look at the universe, the whole universe, then we see, first of all, we can see matter. So matter is everything that we are made of. So I am made of matter, you are all made of matter, this glass of water is made of matter. That's all made of matter, and we can explain what matter is made of. So this is really our scientific model of explaining that it's made of elementary particles, and we interact with fundamental interactions, so with interaction particles. If we look outside in the universe, we see the sun is made out of matter, the moon is made of matter, planets, stars are made of matter. Good. But if we now look a little bit more carefully, we see that there is not a lot of matter in the universe, but instead there is so much more stuff, or we see that, or it looks like there's so much stuff that is not made of matter, but it is there. And we have no idea what it is. I'm not making this up. We even have a name for it. It's called dark matter. We are very creative in science because we know matter, but we have no idea about the other stuff. So we just called it dark matter. We have no idea what it is. I'm not kidding, but we do see that it is there. We see it influences the movement of planets, for example, or stars or galaxies. So something is there. And we can calculate that in the whole universe, if the whole universe is X or something, then we know that 5% of this whole X is matter and 25% is dark matter. So together 30%. And then there is another 70% missing. And this is something where we really have no idea. I mean, we don't have an idea about dark matter. We really don't have an idea about the remaining 70%. And someone already put it into the chat. This is what we like to call dark energy. So the whole energy matter composition of the universe, we have matter, we have dark matter, and we have dark energy. And we don't even know what dark energy is. We don't know what dark matter is, but we have a little bit more ideas. Dark energy is just our explanation of how the universe continues to expand. And we explain it with dark energy, but we don't know. So long story short, because the question initially was, what are we looking for? Well, as I mentioned earlier, the 5%, the matter, that we can explain with the standard model of particle physics. And we can explain it perfectly, brilliantly. Everything works. As I said, it works way too good, actually. But we have no idea how to explain dark matter or dark energy, which I would not even want to mention. So at the moment, I think the biggest question is this dark matter. Is it made of particles, which we don't know? Is it made of something completely new? We have no idea. We really don't know. So we can, what we try to do is we collide particles in the hope of creating new particles that could be constituents of dark matter. We don't know if that works, but that's what our approach is. But in terms of dark energy, for example, we don't even have a real idea where to go, where to start. So these are the questions where I said we are very kind. We leave them up to you. We don't want to answer everything. We just leave them for you, and you can then come in and say, oh, fantastic, I will answer that and get a Nobel Prize for that. That's what we do. And related to the whole answer, and then I will shut up again, someone also asked about antimatter, which is a very important question in this context, because we have matter, we have dark matter. So what is antimatter? And here, antimatter is easier because we understand antimatter. Not fully, completely, but way more than dark matter and dark energy. So what is antimatter? Antimatter is nothing but normal matter, but instead of it being made of elementary particles, antimatter is made of elementary antiparticles. So for every particle, there is an existing antiparticle, and if a lot of antiparticles come together, they could make up antimatter. Unfortunately, or strangely, in our daily world, we see antiparticles, no problem at all. I mean, for example, the positron, which is the antiparticle of the electron, this is part of our life. If you eat a banana, you will at some point have positrons in yourself, because in bananas, you have potassium, which is radioactive, and it produces positrons. This is by no means dangerous. Please do eat bananas. Bananas are very healthy. You would need to eat a lot of bananas before that gets dangerous, and then you probably have more problems by eating millions of bananas. So never worry about that. So antiparticles are part of our life, but we don't see anywhere in the universe that antiparticles combine to form antimatter. We don't see that anywhere except for one place. There is one place in the whole observable universe. It's really one place where we have antimatter. And guess what? This place is here at CERN. I mean, not here, but at CERN, because we at CERN, we can create antimatter. We have the facilities to take antiparticles and merge them together and hold them still in one of our particle traps that I showed you earlier, that you can build on your own if you want. It's the same principle. Ours are a little bit more advanced, but just a little bit. And with those, we can hold antimatter. And then we can investigate why there is no antimatter in the observable universe. So yes, we can produce antimatter, and I just want to be very specific. Antiparticles are part of our life, nothing special there. Combining antiparticles to form antimatter, that is the only place in the world where we see that is at CERN. So we are very proud of that. So we really have a location at CERN that is called the Antimatter Factory, because we create antimatter. All right. I think that was a long answer to several questions. I will drink a sip of water and let Michael decide on how we proceed.
Can can we call on one of the participants who wanted to turn on her microphone and ask? Okay,
Absolutely.
so let's call on Serena if you still want to ask your question.
I don't hear you. I see you moving, but I don't hear anything. I'm not sure. I also don't see that you're muted. So unfortunately, at least I don't hear you. I don't know about Michael.
No, I can't hear you either. So give me a thumbs up if you just want me to read the question that you asked in the chat, because we didn't get to calling you earlier. Okay, perfect. So sorry for the sound issue. So the question is, do you use hydrogen to collide the area after collecting electrons? No, to cool. Yeah.
Do you use hydrogen to cool the area after collecting? Ooh, okay. Let me disentangle the question a little bit. So we do. So I'm not sure what you mean by after collecting electrons. That I'm not sure. But so the cooling at CERN is absolutely crucial. So we do have to cool our machines, but it has nothing to do with collecting particles. It's really just our accelerators. Okay, yeah, okay. So in our accelerators, what we use to steer the particles around the corner is very, very strong magnetic fields. And we create them with superconducting coils. So coils made out of superconducting material. Superconducting is just a very fancy name for a material that loses all its electric resistance if you cool it down a lot. And by a lot, I mean it has to be really, really cold. And so in your question, you specify hydrogen. With hydrogen, we don't cool anything that I'm aware of, but what we use is first a nitrogen, so liquid nitrogen, because if you take the gas nitrogen and liquefy it, it has a temperature of about 100 Kelvin, so very cold. But then we also take liquid helium, and with liquid helium, we can go all the way down to a couple of degrees above absolute zero. So in centigrade or Celsius, we can talk about minus 270 or minus 265 degrees. So really, really cold, and we have to cool it down that much. Otherwise, the machine would not work, but it has nothing to do with the collision of the particles or with collecting particles. It's really just a very important aspect of our machine for it to be able to run. That's the reason. And we are currently investigating if there is superconducting material that also loses its resistance, but at higher energies. And higher energies still means very cold, but not as cold as the current ones, because you can imagine cooling something to so low temperatures is really a huge work. And so that would be challenging.
And just on the topic of superconductors, if anyone's interested more about superconductors, 2 weeks from now, the guest host Gurno is going to be sharing a science show from School Lab. He's the School Lab manager, and it's superconductors take off. So he'll go into a lot more detail than Jeff is able to, answering questions about superconductors.
Perfect.
For people interested in that.
And maybe just to mention, because I know that we are now running quite long, so if anyone has to leave, this is absolutely perfectly fine, and thank you for joining us. So don't feel like you have to sit any longer if you can't or don't want to. But I think we still have 1 or 2 more questions, and then I think we can come to an end at some point.
If we want to group some together, there's a couple still about antimatter, just if it can be used for rockets and things like that.
So, okay, so the one question, why matter overcame antimatter, is a very good question. We don't know. It's very simple. We have no idea why matter is in our universe and why there's no antimatter. We don't know. That's the reason why we look at it. So, very good question and very good answer. We don't know. Can we use antimatter for rockets? Oh, a very good question as well. Unfortunately, the answer is no, unfortunately. And the reason for that is a beautiful law that we have in our universe, and it has to do with conservation of energy. energy is always conserved. And so in order for a rocket to be propelled, for example, instead of burning fuel, you just take antimatter and fuse it with matter, and then the energy that is created powers the rocket. That's a very good idea. But the problem is you need to invest so much energy into creating the antimatter that whatever you put in there, you will not get out more. And so it's so much more difficult to create antimatter in the first place that this, at least for the foreseeable future, is definitely not an option to propel any rockets or spaceships. It would be good, it would be awesome, but unfortunately, we would need to violate conservation law. And to be honest, that we don't want to. The conservation laws are really, really helpful, and I wouldn't want to wake up in the morning without conservation laws. So let's not play with that. It would also be very expensive, but money would not be the issue there. It is really the conservation of energy. Okay, what are you and the team working on right now? Well, in our case, our team, we are a mixture of people who work more on the education side. So we have a lot of PhD students who, for example, develop those hands-on experiments where I showed you a couple of examples. That's what we are doing. And I myself, I'm still in charge of the teacher programs at CERN. So on a day job, I make sure that teachers get in touch with CERN and that they get lectures by scientists. And so at the moment, I'm just managing that online. So I'm in front of Zoom. I look at my green dot on my laptop and I smile at it. And that's my job for 8 to 12 hours a day. And I can't wait until we can go back to interacting on a more personal level, because I miss people. I mean, I have people in my life, no worries, but you know, I miss more people. Okay, someone asked if they can ask a question. By all means, yes, please. Provided your microphone works, we will be more than happy to hear your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
I have a question about string theory. You know, I'm so curious about the things that scientists are doing to prove extra dimensions. And please, can you talk about it a bit?
Wow. Okay, I see. You saved the very difficult questions for the last. Very good question. So first of all, string theory absolutely is one of many different theories. So similar as the standard model of particle physics, string theory is its own model, and there are other models as well. And the idea is, instead of thinking of particles like point-like particles, they think of strings that can vibrate, and depending on how they vibrate, it then appears to be, for example, an electron or some other particle. So that's the very, very basic explanation. I don't want to go too much more in detail, but you mentioned the different dimensions. That's a very good question, because as far as we know at the moment, or as we perceive it in our daily life, there are 4 dimensions. There are 3 in terms of space, so X, Y, and Z. That's our daily life. We don't have more. And we have a 4th dimension, which is time, which goes forward. And that's how we perceive our life, and that's perfectly fine. But we do notice that sometimes in physics, for a theory to make sense, we have to invent or introduce new dimensions. And this doesn't mean that we say, it has to be there. We say it the other way around. We say this theory only works if the universe has more than 4 dimensions, which we don't know. And there are even complicated models. I mean, I don't think I tell you something new. It's very difficult to imagine more than 4 dimensions. I mean, even 4 dimensions is already difficult. I mean, everyone can imagine up, down, front, back, and left, right. We can all imagine that. The time arrow that moves forward, okay, we can also think of that. The moment you start thinking of a 5th or 6th, or there are some theories, you mentioned string theory, it can go all the way up to 23 different dimensions. Please don't ask me how to imagine that. That is not something that we as humans can understand or perceive. This is really more the mathematical description of something. And our explanation of why our universe doesn't look like it has more dimensions is we describe it that dimensions can be folded into each other, which is very complex and complicated to imagine. So I don't want to ask you to say, yeah, that makes sense. That looks very logical. It is not very easy, but that's how we try to explain it. And so how can we investigate if those different dimensions exist? Well, that's what we do in our collisions, for example. It's a very interesting thing. If you collide particles and hundreds of new particles are created, they still have to follow the conservation laws. So all the energies of all the particles that fly out, if you add them together, they have to give the same energy as the original two particles that collided. The same is true for charge, for momentum. All those quantities that are conserved, they have to be conserved in our collisions. And what we do in our collisions, and we have a lot of them, I mentioned 400 million times per second, is we look for events, so collisions, where conservation laws appear to be violated. So where the sum of the energy or the sum of the momentum does not add up. And that there could be different solutions. There could be, we made a mistake. That's usually the first answer, that there was one detector component not working. That's why we do it so many times, because then we can see, is it really a problem on our measurement side, or is there something that the universe shows us? And then if it looks like conservation laws are not conserved, there has to be an explanation for that. And we know conservation laws are fundamental. At least we have never found any results that contradict that. So if there's, for example, energy missing, it could be that this energy went into one of those folded dimensions that we cannot perceive in our daily life. So that would be one idea how that could work. It could also mean that there's a new particle that carried away the energy that we just cannot interact with. So that could be maybe something for dark matter. So that's what we do at the moment. So it's very strange again. We are happy if our experiments look like they are wrong, because wrong always means we have to adapt our explanation. So that's how we look at different dimensions. But at the moment, we are very happy that after work, we can sit down in our home and have, 3 dimensions in our room and one time. And otherwise, it would get very complicated. So let's see what different dimensions mean.
And for
Thank
anyone
you
who
so much.
thinks,
My pleasure.
for anyone who thinks it's weird, the idea of mathematically constructing extra dimensions, a very similar thing happened to predict antimatter, where Paul Dirac, I believe it was, but Jeff can correct me if I have this wrong.
That's correct.
Was looking at some equations saying, hey, look, this is squared here. If we take the square root of that, we don't just have the positive solution or the negative solution, but we have the one with the opposite sign. And so predicted that we could have the same as all of our regular matter particles, but with opposite charge. And it was only confirmed experimentally about a decade later. Is it roughly a decade, Jeff? Like,
that I don't know, to be honest. I'm too lazy to memorize dates.
Yeah,
but,
I'd need to look it up, but I think it's like 10 to 15 years off, so something on that.
Sounds good, yeah.
So mathematical constructions like that, even though it might sound really weird, let's just mathematically invent dimensions for the math to work out. Often we can get experimental confirmation much later than when the idea is initially popularized.
Yeah. There's one question which I'm afraid I might not be able to answer, and it's can you suggest some book on string theory? To be honest, I'm afraid I don't know of any popular books that explain that on a level that I would be happy. I don't even know of any books that I'm not happy with, to be honest. So I'm afraid I have to pass on this question. I would have to look it up. If I find one, I will send it to Michael and he can share. I'm not sure if I find one, but I will look at it myself.
Perfect. And if there is one, I'll send it with the links to your presentation. Any other links we end up sending out later.
Exactly.
And
good. I think the questions dried out in the chat, and I think it has been a long afternoon or evening already. String theory for dummies. Oh yeah, that's a good one actually. That's a good one. And I think I recognize the guy who suggested that. So that's a very good,
you'll remember Ozan. He was at CERN with me during International Teacher Weeks.
Exactly. So this is a very, very good recommendation, because if you know who recommends it and if you trust them, then I fully recommend that. So that is very good. String theory for dummies. Yes.
And not only Ozan is a great teacher, but also he's a great supporter of these virtual science camps. He's come to a bunch. And I believe, unless I'm mistaken, most students joining from Turkey have done so because of his recommendation. So thank you, Ozan, for getting so many people to join.
Nice. I just saw, I think I missed one question, which was sent to me via direct message. So I didn't see it and it was sent to me again. So thank you for posing it again. The question was, what amount of energy is needed to keep the produced particles stable? which is a very good question. What I assume what the question means is keeping particles stable is, so I mean, most particles that we create are stable. We don't have to keep them stable. And every particle has a certain lifetime. So there are some particles that we produce, but they are not alive, I mean, around for a long time. So some of them really, they just transform into other particles after a split second, and some of them even faster. So there is no way of keeping them stable. Maybe what I think, if I interpret the question correctly, is more how do we keep, for example, antimatter stable, or how do we trap antimatter? If that is the question, I will just answer it. If it's not your question, well, I will answer it anyway, because what we use is a combination of electric fields and magnetic fields. And since we never, we don't produce large quantities of antimatter, we don't produce like an anti-iPhone or something far away from that. We produce single anti-atoms, and those single anti-atoms, they are really tiny and they don't have a lot of mass. So to keep them stable, meaning floating in vacuum, you don't need a lot of electricity or electric field because you just have to make sure that it really stays in between the different fields, but they themselves don't have to be very strong. So that is really, in terms of voltage, a couple of volts for that. So that is quite simple. This is also true for our acceleration, by the way. If we accelerate particles, we always say we accelerate to the highest energies possible. We always have to consider we are talking about incredibly tiny particles. So even if they have really high energies, they are still very tiny. So we don't need a lot of voltage to accelerate them. We just need a lot of vacuum so that they don't collide on their way. Okay, shall we? Okay, the last question, then we come to an end.
Yeah, I'll say after the last question there, we won't take any more questions just because it is pretty late and a lot of you probably want to go, and we shouldn't keep Jeff. Like, we could keep until midnight if we keep asking. So that'll be the last question. I
can talk without stopping, but at some point I really have to have dinner. So I will. So the question was, can you explain Schrödinger cat? And it's not necessarily something that we at CERN encounter a lot. So I'm more than happy to explain it and to draw a picture. But we have to be clear that this is really something that has to do with so-called quantum effects, or the quantum nature of particles. And honestly, this is something why we at CERN are so happy we don't have to deal with this kind of effects, to be honest, because our particles have way higher energies, and at those high energies, there is really there are no quantum effects that we can observe. But so the idea of Schrödinger cat is a so-called Gedanken experiment, which is a German word that made it into the English language. It's an experiment that you should really only do in your head. And the reason for that is not just because it's difficult, but also because it involves a cat, and I love cats, and it's a very mean experiment. So this is really something we should only do in our heads. So the idea is you take a box that is not visible from the outside, so you cannot look inside, and you put a cat, a very cute cat, inside, and you are a very mean scientist. So again, it's really just a thought experiment. You put a device, first a small bottle of poison in there, which is contained in a bottle, but next to it you have a so-called mechanism that at some point randomly just smashes this bottle, and then the poison evaporates and kills the cat. So don't do that. That's really I like cats, don't do that. But as an idea, we can do it. So we put all of that into the box. We say, hello kitty, sleep well. You close the box, and then you wait. And then another scientist asks you and says, hey, what's in the box? And then you have to kind of admit that you just locked a poor cat inside a box with poison. So very strange. But he asks you, okay, so is this cat now alive or is it dead? And the question is to you, actually. I mean, what would you say? Is it dead? Is it alive? You don't know if this mechanism smashed this bottle of poison. And when it will do so. So unless you open the box, you don't know. You don't know if it's alive or dead. And this example, what we like to say, it's in a mixed state. So the cat is both alive and dead. We don't know what it is. So it's in a mixed state between both. And only if you open the box, only if you observe, if you do a measurement, you can see dead, which would be really mean, or if it's still alive, and then you take it out and say, "Oh, come on, kitty, sorry, I'm sorry." So, and the reason behind this Gedanken experiment, this thought experiment, is to explain that in quantum physics, when we really talk about isolated particles at low energies, unless we observe them, we don't know in which state they are. So the observation changes or decides their state. And someone correctly pointed out in the chat that it has to do, it relates to wave functions. That's perfectly correct. So when we talk about particles, we describe them with so-called wave functions, which is a mathematical expression. And the moment we measure, all of the different wave functions collapse, as we say, and one remains, and this is then either the cat is dead or alive. So it's a very mean thing. So, but don't take it, don't take it personal with Schrödinger. Schrödinger was a very smart guy, and the good news was he never killed the cat himself or anyone else. It was really just in our heads. We think it through to explain that, that a cat can be in both states, and unless you open the box, you don't know. Okay, that was a small excursus at the end into the field of quantum physics, where you have quantum effects, which are mind-blowing and sometimes really, really strange to understand because it behaves differently from our daily life. But if that sounds intriguing to you, I can highly encourage you to read any book you get or listen to any talks on YouTube. And maybe at some point we will see each other at CERN. That would be awesome.
And just because of the time, that brings questions to the end. Well, and I think most questions are done. Selma seems to have recommended, I think it's a book. If it's not a book, correct me, the explanation of Brian Greene about string theory. Apparently it's a really good one. I'm going to check it out because that sounds good. So now that we're done with the questions, I'm briefly going to mention some of the other upcoming science camps because there were some questions on that. I'm putting a link in the chat to the calendar, so I don't need to spend much time talking about it. But just to really briefly go over things, on Tuesdays, I'm inviting guest hosts like Jeff from all over the world. Next week, we have one from the Joint Institute of Nuclear Research in Russia, Dmitry Dryablow, for a lecture on the Big Bang Theory, the evolution of the universe. I'm really looking forward to that one. 2 weeks from now, we have Jeff's colleague, Gernot, from School Lab. By the way, I didn't mention it earlier, but Jeff designed School Lab himself, which is pretty cool. And you'll notice, should I tell them about the J in the logo?
Sure.
You'll notice there's a, like, School Lab, the apostrophe is actually a J, and that's Jeff hiding his signature in there for it.
Yeah, so I don't need a Nobel Prize. I already have my logo on at CERN's wall, so I'm done.
And then just for other upcoming particle physics virtual science camps, so on Saturdays, I have hands-on sessions where we'll go through experiments for you to follow along with simple materials from around your home. This Saturday coming up is modeling magnification. 2 weeks from now is electromagnetics or introduction to electromagnetics, to prepare anyone who doesn't know much about electromagnetism for superconductors the following Tuesday. If you want more details, please check out the calendar. I could talk for hours about what's coming up, but it's already late now, so I'm going to stop talking about that. I just want to thank all the participants who joined. We were up to 54 at some point. There were people signed up from 11 different countries. Some just had one person from, so I didn't take attendance. I don't know if we got all 11, but we had people intending to come from France, Belgium, Iran, Turkey, Romania, Russia, Germany, Spain, Switzerland, the US, and Italy. So it's amazing getting to travel internationally with you guys without even leaving home. Thank you for joining us, and especially a big thank you to Jeff again. This is amazing having you back.
Thank you so much. I will now go to my websites and update that I'm the Willy Wonka of science, and then I will have dinner. Yeah, thank you so much for joining, and thank you for the amazing questions. There was really, really a good, fantastic amount of really good questions. So I'm very happy. And I was also happy that there were some names that I recognized from a couple of years ago. And thank you so much for joining, and I miss you.
Thank you, everyone. And
have a nice evening, and stay positive, but test negative.